sections. So you'll notice when I drag it out, what it shows me is page 1, page 2, and page 3, which are the pages immediately under the home page. And that's just kind of the default navigation setting for this. If I go into test mode, which I can enter by clicking this hand icon in the upper bar, you'll notice that as I mouse over this, that it actually has flyouts of all of the sub-navigation. And if I add pages to the sitemap, or if I move things around, then the navigation will automatically update to reflect that. So it's a really handy way to build navigation if you're, especially if your sitemap is still in some sort of flux. But the interesting thing, that's not the only thing you can do with the page navigation. So when I open the inspector, you'll see that it's set to pages as top-level pages. There are 3 other settings. First is Sibling Pages. So when I set it to Sibling Pages, then the pages that are going to be used to build the sitemap are going to be the siblings of the page that I'm on. So you'll see I have a wireframe open called sub of page 1, which is this particular page. So the siblings are sub 2 of page 1 and sub 3 of page 1. So one interesting thing you can do with this setting of navigation is I could create a template that kind of gives me subsection navigation. And maybe a better example of this is vertical navigation, because what you can imagine is the typical website where I've got kind of this site-wide navigation at the top, and on the side I want to have navigation of the subsections, kind of these sibling pages. Now if I turn this into a template, so you'll see, first of all, this says home. So when I'm on a template, I don't have a page that this is anchored to. So it's going to use home as the sibling page. But if I go back to the subpage 1, which now has the template applied, you'll see that this looks the same. And to kind of illustrate what the difference is, we'll open this subpage of this other section of page 2, and drag the navigation template out, and you'll notice that its subsection navigation is for the section that I'm currently in. So that kind of allows you to build out navigation that that will dynamically update. So essentially to build a template with this type of subsection navigation. I'm going to go ahead and detach this from the template, just to make it a little easier to inspect. So there's some other things that you can do with this as well. You'll notice there's this max levels setting, and max levels just basically means if you have flyouts, this behavior where the sub pages are going to expand. How many levels do you want to show? So if I say max levels is 1, then you'll notice that I no longer have the flyouts. So if you've got a really deep page tree and you don't want flyouts going to every level, you can set it that way. There's a child pages setting. It's just kind of similar to the children setting. I'm on a page now that has no child pages, so nothing's showing up. But you can kind of use that for the same subsection style of navigation. And then the last setting that I want to look at is called the custom setting. And so with the custom setting, what I can actually do is I can just choose the pages that I'm interested in. Oops. So if I want, like, for instance, page 1, I just drag it over, and maybe page 3, I drop it in, and this creates kind of a custom navigation. But the nice thing about this navigation is it also has the feature of automatic updating. So I think so if I increase my max levels, then you'll see that I'm still going to see my sub-page navigation, and it'll dynamically update. If I add children to one of the pages that I've included in that custom navigation, then that will show up as well. So there's some other settings here when you're using custom. One is custom level, and what this allows you to do is you can specify an actual distinct level at which you want the navigation to start. So the custom level is a way of drilling down from the home page just to start that sort of automated navigation. The use children setting, you can set to have the custom pages use their children instead of themselves. A good example of this would be, get rid of this. If I said use children yes and dragged page 1 into custom pages, then you'll see I get the children of page 1 instead of page 1 itself. So there's really quite a bit you can do with the automated navigation. It can really save you some time if you set it up in templates or things like that. So before we leave navigation, there's some other things that I want to talk a little bit about. And the first is going to be some of the appearance settings that you can use. I'm going to go ahead and detach this template so that we can look at some of the appearance settings. So with the release of 6.3, so one of the things we added was the ability to have a lot more custom styles and custom colors. So, for instance, if I select this navigation, obviously I can change its position, its width and height. I can change the stroke thickness, change the fill color, and add rounding. And those are pretty straightforward. Some of the more advanced things you can do, if you're looking at the inspector at the appearance setting, you'll see that under this there's normal appearance, and you have the ability to set the appearance for normal, hover, active, and click. So the normal setting is the standard setting you're going to see when you load the page. The hover setting is the style that you're going to see when you mouse over the navigation. So if I mouse over this, you'll notice it's gray. That's because it's got a fill color set to gray. So I can change that mouse over color. Let's make it orange just so that it stands out. And in addition to that, there's also an active color. So the active setting is a setting that matters mainly for page navigation and state navigation. And so the active setting is going to take effect when you're on that particular page or when that state is set. So if we look at this navigation, the active has a fill color of gray. I'm going to change this to red so we can see that this red section, that this section is now red. It's because I'm editing this page. So when I'm on this page, it's going to have these particular styles. And then finally, there's a click setting that you can set. So if you want it to change colors when you click on it, you can do that as well. And again, so you really have a lot of control over those styles. Some of the other interesting things, rounding. If you want to make kind of a rounded navigation, if you add rounding by default to a navigation. It's going to add it to each individual item. There's actually a setting here where you can have it round, the group. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm on the click setting, which is why this wasn't working. But if I go back to the normal setting, set the rounding to the group, you'll see it rounds just the ends. All right, so I think that pretty much covers most of the things that you can do with the navigation. If there are any questions, please go ahead and type them in. Otherwise, we'll move on to some other items. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the navigation. I'm going to pull up the palette, and so the next thing we want to look at, we just looked at the page navigation. Now I want to take a quick look at state navigation. So state navigation, you'll see, looks pretty similar, to the page navigation that we just looked at. You've got a pretty similar set of components. To do this, I'm going to actually pop open the Stencils and Widgets library. If you haven't seen this, I would encourage you. There's a link at the bottom of your component palette to go and explore that. So the Stencils and Widgets library has quite a few different components that you can use on your prototypes. It can really speed your development. I'm going to grab a carousel component because I think it's a good illustration of what you can do with state navigation. So this is a carousel component that has 3 items in the carousel. So what I want to do now is just take a look at how this is set up. So I'm going to pop open the listing, and you'll see I've got quite a few containers with states, and in particular I have 2 previous next state value components. So these are part of the standard set of state navigation, the previous next component. Now let's take a look at the settings for this. So with any of the state components, you're going to bind them directly to a state. So you'll see we've got a state here called carousel. If I edit the state, you'll see it's just got 3 values, 1, 2, and 3. I could add additional states to this if I wanted to. Another thing you'll notice is that it's got custom text, and the custom text is just this right-facing caret. And that's what allows you to style the previous next state component to look like this little button. If I wanted to, I could say make it the next value or make it the current value. And then there's also a wraparound flag which lets you set this. But so basically, I'm going to go and change this back to custom. So what this does is it gives you a button that allows you to cycle through the states. So every time I click this button, you'll notice it's just advancing this carousel state by 1. And because I've got it set to wrap around, it wraps back around to 1 when you get to the end. And all this is the one on the left-hand side is the same thing, except for the direction is changed to backward instead of forward. So again, that's one way to use the state navigation. Another thing I could do, just to illustrate how the different state navigations work together. So if I pull out a horizontal state navigation and a vertical state navigation, and a selection, and a radio group, and you'll kind of get a feel for how all of these things work together. Now, we'll just select them all, open the inspector, and bind them all to the carousel state. So now what you'll see is when I click any of these controls, that you'll see that it changes for all of them. This one's so that, you know, again, and so state navigation is really useful for things like tabbed panels, for slideshows, yeah, and you know, sometimes people even build, you know, maybe a kind of a state walkthrough with something like, you know, like this radio group, or with the drop-down menu to kind of guide reviewers through the prototype by moving from state to state. So, you know, another good thing that this illustrates, I think, that this particular item illustrates, is the use of containers. So if you look at this structure, and there was nothing on the page before I dragged this item, you'll see that there's a container here. Let me just give this a big border so you can see where it is. So there's this container that contains everything in this item. And the first thing it's got this pink tulip image, and if I roll these up, you'll basically see that this container has the previous next buttons. It has 3 containers and 3 images. So if I open one of these smaller containers, you'll see that it's got text, which is this red tulip text, and it's got a rich text, which is this you know, placeholder text. And then there's the image, which is the, you know, the larger image that's overlaid on top of. So what you'll see is, you know, that these containers are kind of end up being used like layers. And by, you know, when you have a container, if you're setting visibility using states on a container, then you know, by default, everything that's inside that container is going to have the same states. So when I hide a container, everything that's inside that container hides as well. So again, the way this is set up is, you know, is to have this kind of master container and then a different container for every, you know, for every layer, for every option. If I wanted to add a new layer to this, all I would have to do is select one of the images and containers, and then you can actually. It's another trick that may not be obvious but can be useful, is that if you select something in the listing, you can actually drag it onto the canvas either to move it, or I'm going to option drag to actually duplicate those 2 components. So you see I've duplicated those, and I'm going to change it from pink tulip to pink flower as the text. You'll see that these 2 show up down here where I've dragged them. I'm going to actually drag them both into this other container, and then I'm going to go ahead and just set the XY location to match these other ones. Oops. Then what I need to do is for this container, I'm going to actually add a value to this. Let's add number 4. And we'll make this particular container visible only when the carousel is equal to 4. And the same with this pink tulip image. And so now I've just added, another item to this slideshow. Okay, so are there any questions about about state navigation or when it be useful? Just as one more example, since we have a little bit of time, is if you look at something like the tabbed panels, here you'll see that you've got kind of the same kind of the same idea, that by using the tab navigation, the tabbed panel navigation, you can easily create this tabbed panel. Just by linking this to a single state, you can you can pretty easily wire up this type of behavior. Okay, so do we have any questions so far? We're kind of running through a lot of the things that we wanted to cover fairly quickly. All right, so if there are no more questions, then let's go ahead and talk about a few other features of ProtoShare that may or may not be obvious on first blush. One of the first things that I think is important to really get the most out of ProtoShare is to know that there are quite a few keyboard shortcuts that work with ProtoShare. You can get a full list from the help. There's a keyboard shortcuts link that'll show you the full list. But in general, it's going to be what we've tried to do is to make those shortcuts match what you would expect from your standard desktop applications. So for instance, option drag, will duplicate for you. If you're resizing something, like let's just grab an image. And you hold down the Shift key after you select it, it's going to maintain the aspect ratio. So this allows you to resize things and maintain their proper aspect ratio. There's another pretty easy way to do this, which is if you select this, you'll notice it's got its width and height with these two check boxes. If you if you disable one of these, which essentially makes it kind of an auto height, then you're going to end up maintaining the aspect ratio. Oops. Yeah, actually, I'm just realizing I think this is a browser bug that you need to disable the width, because auto height is a little bit buggy in some browsers. I keep doing the wrong one. So yeah, so that again allows you to resize and maintain aspect ratio. But there's a feature of containers that you can, if you right-click, you'll notice you can lock position. Locking position of a container essentially makes it uneditable. So you can unlock the position. But you can also lock the contents of a container. So for instance, if I put an image in this container, and then I lock the contents, it does a couple of things for me. First, I don't have to worry about accidentally dropping something else in the container. So you'll notice here that I dropped that, but it's not in the container. It was on top of it. You can unlock the contents then if you want to edit something that's inside of it. Lock it again to freeze things. And another thing you can do is if you're working on this to quickly kind of drill to edit, if you just double click the container, it'll actually unlock that the locked contents and allow you to kind of drill in there and start moving things around. So containers, when you're talking about containers and using them, a lot of times they'll be used kind of the way they are in this tab panel is use a container as a layer. So you'll assign a visibility to it, and you'll build a bunch of things inside of it so that those hide when the container hides. But it's also helpful for kind of as a grouping mechanism. So when I've got this container and I move around everything that's inside of it, and I move it around, everything that's inside of it moves. But ProtoShare has another facility for doing something similar. I'm going to go ahead and just option drag this image out, and that's the grouping function. So I'm just option dragging these images to make copies of them. And if I select all three, you'll notice there's a group function. So when I group these, then they all select together. ProtoShare's got, when multiple items are selected, it's going to allow you to change different properties of the components. It's not a very good example because you can't really see it. And you can change those all at one time, which is very handy and can save a lot of time. But then sometimes if you're working on a group, I've got these three things, I want them to move together, but you need to work on one. There's something called the group clutch, which is you can access up here in the toolbar. It says automatically select group members. If you turn this off, then you can go back to editing these group members, one at a time. But they keep their group relationship. So if I move this one over here, tell it to start respecting groups again, then once again these things are grouped. So that can be a really handy way to work with different groups of items. Okay, so if there are no questions, then we'll move on to what's our last topic, which is just talking a little bit about using templates and masters and kind of how to get the most out of that and what the difference is. So I'm going to go ahead and actually. That's not true. We've got one additional subject after templates and masters, which is I just want to show you briefly the advanced HTML component and talk a little bit about how that works. So in ProtoShare, you can turn any object or set of objects into a master or a template. So masters and templates both have the feature that you can edit them once and change them everywhere that they're used. So that can be really handy. One of the things that it's typically used for is something like a header that you're going to reuse that header on every page. You want it to look the same. If you're going to make a change, you want it to cascade to all of the subpages. And the main difference between a template and a master is every page can have only one template. So the template is and it's always in the same location. So the template is really like like a basic foundational layer of a page. And again, what you'll typically see with templates. Let me go ahead and import a template that's a little more interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and import a header template from another project. You'll see when I apply that, I've got, various, I've got various navigation and different setups, and you'll notice it shows up in the upper left-hand corner, and then I can start building onto this. There's in the listing. You can open the template so that I can edit the template. Maybe I want to get rid of this image, and then when I go back to this page, that'll be reflected. There's one other kind of interesting feature with templates, which is the child template content, which essentially lets you create a custom offset for a template. So let me show you exactly how this works. So I've got this hi-fi header, and let's just say, I don't think I have any masters here. So let's just say that I wanted to create a page underneath of this. Oops. So I'm going to add a header. I'm going to add a little block of text and an image. And so you'll notice, where this is positioned below the header. But if you imagine that I want to change this header, like I'm going to get rid of this intermediate navigation. Now if I go back here, you'll notice there's a gap between the bottom of the header and the navigation. But because I had set up a child template offset, I can actually take that offset and I can move it up to where I want it to be. And now when I click back to the subpage 1, you'll see the content is moved up. So by default, with a new template, I'll go ahead and create a new template. What you'll see is that the child template content is in the upper left-hand corner, and it's locked. So if you want to use this feature, you actually have to go ahead and unlock this thing, and then you can use it and put the child content wherever you want. I mean, what this really helps with is if you're changing your header and its dimensions change, it gives you a way to adapt the page content without having to go back through every single page and move all of the content down or up or to the left or right. So then let's talk about masters. So masters are a little bit different in that, a master is really kind of a reusable widget. So for instance, if I was going to use this structure of 3 elements all over the place, I could convert them to a master. We'll call it text block with image. So you'll see now I've got this master. It's used. I close some of my tabs. It's used on this subpage. So if I want to duplicate the master, I can do that. Let's create 4 copies. Then any changes that I make to this will cascade through to these other masters. You can detach masters, which then copies the content for that to your local local layout so that you can make changes. And again, pretty much behaves the way that that you think it would behave. One of the other things you can do with masters is you can use masters to control states. And this kind of actually brings us to one of the topics about states, which is that there are both global states and local states. When you're working with masters, you're going to almost always want to use global states. I'm going to go ahead and create a state. I'm going to call it logged in. And I'm going to make the two values no and yes. And we're going to go ahead and make this a global state. So what I'll do is I'll select this image and I'll say, on click, let's set logged in to yes. And then with this text, I'll say on click, we'll set logged in to no. So, I've set this global state value, based on this. You'll notice in the master it doesn't have any effect. I mean, I click it, it changes the state, but there's nothing whose visibility is dependent on that state. If I go back to this page and maybe I want to add let's go ahead and add a text box. Let's say you are logged in. And then I'll just dupe that. You are not logged in. Then I'm going to select this. I'm going to say visible only when, whoops, logged in is yes. And this one I'm going to say visible only when logged in is no. So because I use this global state, what it means is that the masters will now reference reference that same state, so that I can set state on a different page based on the master. The other thing about global states is that they will transfer from page to page. So, I've got this just simple example of saying whether I'm logged in or not logged in. Let's go ahead and go back here. So the sub of page 1. Let's go ahead and add a quick link to sub of page to this other page. Say link to this page. Then I'm actually going to just copy these two text items. I select them over here, copy it. I'm going to open this page, paste them, and drag them up to the top. Make the text a little bigger. Whoops, that's the stroke. And then if I open this in review, what you'll see is, as I set this, so I say I'm not logged in, and then when I link through to the other page, it says I'm not logged in. Now if I click this and it says I am logged in, and then I link to that other page, then it tells me I'm logged in. So again, global states are really useful when you need to maintain state between different pages in your prototype. So I use logged in as the example because it seems to be the most comprehensible of this, is that whether you're logged in on a site or not is kind of a global state. You set your logged in value, and then that carries with you from page to page. All right. Close those beautiful wireframes. And then, I think the last thing that I really want to show is the advanced HTML component. what the advanced HTML component is good for is if you want to illustrate some behavior that's important to your prototype, but either you just can't do it in ProtoShare, or it would be too much work, or there's a great library out there that you want to use, you can use the advanced HTML component. So I've got an advanced HTML component on this page. You'll notice if you inspect it, it's got kind of the same settings as other components. When I edit the content, you'll see I just get kind of an HTML and CSS editor. You create your own page. This references JavaScript that's on Google. And when you save this, it creates this interactive map, based on Google's code. So, it's pretty straightforward if you've got HTML, JavaScript, and CSS skills. This is something you can use, fairly easily to get some detailed, behavior in there. One example of things that we like to, or the things that I've used this for in the past, or that customers have told me is, one example is something like a date picker field, which can have really complicated behavior. It could be, you could have a range picker, you can have all sorts of different ways of choosing that date. And in fact, you don't really want to reinvent the wheel when you're building a date picker. So jQuery has a date picker component, and it's got lots of different settings that you can use. So it was pretty simple for someone to build an advanced HTML component with the jQuery date picker, and then just copy it 5 times on the page and tweak the settings a little bit so that it could kind of illustrate for people what the differences are, what the important behaviors were with that date picker. Okay, so I believe that I've covered all the topics that we had to cover today. I've got a little bit of time left if there are any questions. Otherwise, I think we are done. I hope everyone got something out of this. Thanks to everyone for attending, and have a good day.